Hello and welcome to Weekly News Highlights. I'm Kim Dami in Seoul. Let us begin with the keywords that made headlines this week. South Korea has set June 3rd as the date for its snap presidential election to replace former President Yoon Suk-yeol, who was dismissed for his botched martial law order. U.S. President Donald Trump dropped reciprocal tariffs on most of his country's trade partners to 10% for 90 days, making room for negotiations. But Trump hit China even harder with a total tariff of 145%. South Korea this week sealed diplomatic relations with Syria being the last UN member state that South Korea didn't have diplomatic ties with. South Korea now has official relations with all UN member states except North Korea. The date's been set for South Korea's 21st presidential election after President Yoon Suk-yeol was removed from office last week for his martial law declaration last December. It's an early election, meaning the race will be more intense, more compact than in regular election years. What will be the main issues put forward by each party, and what do voters want to see? We have our correspondent Oh Soo-young to discuss what will shape this snap election. Welcome, Soo-young.
Hi, Tammy. It's great to be here.
So, Soo-young, candidate registrations will take place next month, but we've already seen the most prominent figures emerge. Let's go over who they are and where they stand.
Sure, Tammy. So reading the polls, we have to begin with Lee Jae-myung, who is the clear front-runner. He's the Democratic Party's most influential figure and currently leads public polls with around 32% support. And of course, this varies from poll to poll. Few others have entered the race from the DP side, other than Gyeonggi-do Province Governor Kim Dong-yeon and former Gyeongsang-namdo Province Governor Kim Doo-kwon. Now, there have been calls for an open primary to make the selection process more transparent, but Yi appears to be unlikely to support that. While he hasn't officially been nominated, it's widely assumed that he is going to be, with party members under growing pressure to rally behind him. Meanwhile, the People Power Party is seeing a more crowded field. Former Labour Minister Kim Mun-soo, former Daegu Mayor Hong Jun-pyo, ex-party leader Han Dong-un and Seoul Mayor Oh Se-eun, they're all joining the race, with all declaring his candidacy this weekend. So where do these candidates currently stand? Well, Yi, of course, remains the strongest single candidate, but his support has actually plateaued at around 32 to 34%. Conservative candidates are well behind him, but it's worth noting that this might change once the PPP decides on a final candidate, according to experts. And while the race could be rather close, as DP holds only a slight edge with a 34% backing, it was actually on par with the PPP 2 weeks ago. Interestingly, support for a changing government dropped 3 percentage points from the previous week to 48%, while 37% now say that they prefer continuity.
Now, what kind of strategies are we seeing so far, Soo-young?
Well, Tammy, in an ideal presidential race and perhaps a normal election year, candidates would discuss economic and social policies and lay out their visions for the country. But this year, experts say the contest will be dominated by political narratives. Both major parties are framing the election as a referendum on the other. The DP is focusing on restoring democracy, accusing the Conservatives of enabling former President Yoon's martial law, or his insurrection, as they say. And meanwhile, the PPP is fueling the Lee Jae-myung phobia, appealing to voters who want anyone but the former DP leader, who faces 5 ongoing criminal cases. In effect, Koreans are being asked to cast a vote of judgment either against Yoon Suk-yeol's legacy or Lee Jae-myung's leadership. Still, both sides will need to present credible economic and foreign policy plans. Public anxiety over inflation, youth unemployment and housing insecurity, those factors remain high, and externally, US tariffs and trade uncertainty are further darkening the outlook. In response, both parties are expected to unveil pledges from boosting core tech industries to rental subsidies and startup investments. Also, leadership skill in terms of diplomacy will also be essential. Beyond North Korea issues, the next president must navigate turbulent global trade and geopolitical tensions.
Now, I have to ask, what kind of voting pattern might emerge this year, Soo-young?
Well, last time, swing voters had a strong influence on the outcome of the election. Now, that was clear with a razor-thin margin of 0.78% that handed former President Yoon Suk-yeol the presidency over Lee Jae-myung. Now, at the time, it was mostly men in their 20s and 30s. Experts say this time around, it's likely to be that very same demographic.
Voters in their 60s and older tend to support the PPP, and those in their 40s and 50s tend to support the DP. Those in their 60s and older make up about 33% of the total electorate, while people in their 40s and 50s make up around 37%. Since the turnout rate of those over 60 is high, the vote share of both sides ends up being similar. So ultimately, it's those in their 20s and 30s who will decide the outcome.
Then what is it that these voters are hoping to see?
Well, we saw following the impeachment of former President Park Geun-hye that Moon Jae-in came to power with the motto of, quote, removing deeply rooted evils, or simply put, an anti-corruption drive. In fact, President Yoon was the lead prosecutor at that time, driving some of those changes, and his own motto was to establish fairness and common sense. Now, of course, when he came to power 2.5 years in, that all crumbled with the fall of his administration, which the DP blame on Yoon's martial law and the PPP blame on the DP's abuse of its legislative majority, which introduced 29 impeachments for government officials. So whichever side that voters stand on, it's clear that there's distrust surrounding the democratic institutions in this country, as well as the rule of law.
The spirit of our times demands the restoration of the rule of law and a return to fairness. Through the impeachment crisis of President Yoon, the rule of law was severely damaged. His administration was launched under the motto of fairness under law, but it ended up derailing midway. So I think the people, especially those in their 20s and 30s, will strongly express their desire for our society to return to fairness.
In the wake of the martial law crisis, both Conservative and Liberal candidates have floated constitutional reform as the way to curb presidential overreach, as well as prevent deadlock between branches of the state, such as the President and Parliament. Proposals range from introducing a 4-year presidential term to strengthening the role of the Prime Minister or expanding local government powers. Now, public support for reform seems to be at a record high, with around 65 to 7% saying that the 1987 Constitution needs to be updated. Now, National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik initially backed the push, but later backed down after Democratic Party leader Lee Jae-myung dismissed the idea, saying that it should be addressed after the election. Now, whether constitutional reform remains a major issue, therefore, is quite uncertain.
Although constitutional reform has been discussed every time a new administration has taken office, it has never been successfully achieved as the leader becomes passive. So I think whoever becomes president must push strongly for constitutional reform in the early days of their term. That, in my view, would be the first step toward true national unity.
There's clearly a need for governance to change to win back public trust. Soo-young, let's see if the candidates can offer such change. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me, Tammy.
The People Power Party on Thursday disclosed its partisan primary election plan. The first round of cutoffs will be based on public opinion, aiming to better reflect their sentiment. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon has more.
The rules for the People Power Party's presidential primary are set. With over 10 contenders expected to vie for the nomination, there will be a series of cutoffs. But their biggest challenge, winning public support amid the fallout from President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment. That's why the first round of cutoffs to leave 4 contenders will be an open survey to all citizens, not just their registered members.
The decision to base the first round entirely on the general public was made in response to widespread calls for an open primary and greater weight on public sentiment. This ensures that candidates who align with the public's expectations can advance to the 4-way race.
As for the specific timeline, the first round of candidates will be finalized by April 16th. After 3 days of debates, the general public poll will leave 4 contenders. For the next few days, the 4 candidates will face the media and debate each other. The next cutoff survey starts on the 27th, and by the 29th, the remaining two will be decided through an open poll for 50% and eligible PPP electors for 50%, or registered PPP members who've paid for party membership at least once in the past year. If one of the four contenders receives more than 50% of the final votes here, he or she will be the final candidate. If not, on April 30th, a debate will be held between the two contenders. On May 3rd, the PPP will hold a convention and announce its candidate. Meanwhile, to prevent tactical voting in open polls where opposition supporters might boost a weaker PPP candidate, those who previously backed another are excluded from the survey sample. As for the race, the latest to enter is former PPP chair Han Dong-hoon. Speaking at the National Assembly, Han vowed to block what he called Lee Jae-myung's monstrous administration and says he wants a generational shift in politics.
I'm going to create a nation where the citizens come first, the middle class grows, and practicality beats ideology. With that in mind, I will make a change in politics, the era, and the generation.
Once the closest to President Yoon, Han broke ranks in early 2024 and even backed Yoon's impeachment. Because of this, he is expected to score high on the all-open voting tallies. Daegu Mayor Hong Jun-pyo is also likely a beneficiary, and his declaration is set to come next Monday. On the other hand, Yoon's close political ally Na Kyung-won also announced that she will declare her candidacy on Friday. Kim Mun-soo and An Chol-soo are among those that's declared candidacy already. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea's political uncertainty has subsided after former President Yoon Suk-yeol's dismissal last Friday. And 4 days after the court's impeachment ruling, acting President and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo held phone talks with U.S. President Donald Trump, where the two sides discussed security alliance and tariff-related issues. Our Oh Soo-young reports.
The leaders of South Korea and the United States have signaled interest in a potential win-win package deal amid tensions over tariffs and defense cost sharing. This came during a phone call Tuesday between acting President Han Duck-soo and US President Donald Trump, marking the first top-level contact between the two countries since Trump began his second term 78 days ago. It also follows a leadership shift in Seoul, just 4 days after President Yoon Suk-yeol was removed from office by the Constitutional Court, placing Prime Minister Han in full control as acting president. The 28-minute conversation focused on trade and security issues. On trade, both leaders agreed to continue ministerial-level talks aimed at mutually beneficial outcomes, particularly around trade balance. Han highlighted potential cooperation in 3 key sectors: shipbuilding, liquefied natural gas, and trade adjustment. The call came just 16 hours before the US implemented its so-called Liberation Day levies, a 10% baseline tariff on all imports, and a country-specific reciprocal tariffs on goods from South Korea. On security issues, Han called for stronger unity on North Korea's denuclearization as both leaders reaffirmed their dedication to the South Korea-US alliance. They also pledged close coordination on North Korea policies and backed continued trilateral cooperation with Japan. Beyond the formalities, both sides appeared willing to work towards a deal. Speaking to CNN earlier that day, Han ruled out retaliation against Trump's tariffs, unlike China or Japan, and called for a, quote, cool negotiation. On top of last month's duties on steel and aluminium, Washington's latest measures target key Korean exports, such as automobiles, batteries, and machinery. While calling Trump's string of tariffs a pity, Han said he believed a win-win deal between friends could encourage Washington to ease its stance. Meanwhile, Trump took to Truth Social, posting that he had a great call with Han. He said they discussed South Korea's trade surplus, tariffs, LNG purchases, and cost sharing for US troops in Korea. Trump claimed South Korea began paying billions in military costs during his first term, only for, quote, sleepy Joe Biden to cancel the deal. However, no such agreement was finalized. A new cost-sharing pact was signed under Biden last year, raising South Korea's contribution by 8.3% from 2026, with annual increases tied to inflation, marking a significant financial commitment by Seoul. Still, as a growing number of countries strike back against his tariffs, Trump seemed hopeful for a breakthrough with South Korea, saying he saw potential for a great deal. Noting that South Korea's, quote, top team on trade was en route to Washington, he floated a one-stop shopping approach which bundles trade, defense and industrial policy into one sweeping pact. A South Korean government official told local press on Wednesday that Seoul prioritizes the easing of tariffs. The official added that Trump seemed open to a streamlined package deal, but said sealing a pact will depend on the pace of negotiations and what cards the two sides bring to the table. 오수영, Arirang News, Daejeong.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Thursday made a dramatic reversal, announcing a 90-day pause on the reciprocal tariffs that came into force the previous day. But China was an exception here, being struck with a whopping 145% tariff. Our Park Kwon-woo tells us more.
The White House said Thursday that imports from China now face a retaliatory 145% tariff. According to officials, an existing 20% levy will be added to the 125% tariff announced the day before. That tariff was imposed by Donald Trump in February in response to China's role in supplying fentanyl and its precursors to the U.S. However, Trump also said he remains open to talks with Beijing.
Well, I have great respect for President Xi. He's been, in a true sense, he's been a friend of mine for a long period of time. And I think that we'll end up working out something that's very good for both countries.
On Wednesday, Trump announced a 90-day pause on additional tariffs, keeping a 10% baseline tariff in place for trading countries except China. The following day, he said what happens after that would depend on the situation at that time, but stressed that tariffs would return if no negotiations took place during the pause. Also on Thursday, White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett said 15 countries had made explicit offers to lower tariffs, with some being considered and other deals close to being agreed.
We're setting up a very orderly process to prioritize countries and to make sure that the countries that are most important for getting this to the finish line are the countries that we bring in first.
He added that he expects a lot of movement on trade deals within the next 3 to 4 weeks. Park Kwon-woo, Arirang News.
And the tit-for-tat tariff spat between the U.S. and China lasted the entire week, with Beijing having responded with a 84% levy on American goods. But it also expressed a willingness to negotiate with Washington. Lee Seung-ja has more.
The United States and China have been facing off with tariffs imposed left and right. China responded to U.S. President Donald Trump's 104% tariffs by imposing an 84% tariff on American goods. Trump quickly countered with additional tariffs against China, with levies now at up to 145%. On Thursday, Beijing expressed its willingness to hold talks with the U.S. in the hope of putting an end to the tariff war.
China's position is clear and consistent. If the United States wants to talk, our door is open. However, dialogue must be conducted on an equal footing and on the basis of mutual respect.
The spokesperson also warned that if the U.S. insists on pursuing a tariff war, China will respond and fight till the end. She added that pressure, threats, or blackmail are not the right way to deal with China. The European Union is also open for negotiations with the U.S. as it announced it would put its trade retaliation measures on hold for 90 days. According to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on Thursday, the bloc took note of the announcement by President Trump, adding that the EU wants to give negotiations a chance. The European Commission spokesperson also announced the 27-member bloc's willingness to hold talks with Washington.
We believe we can reach all sorts of beneficial outcomes from both sides that would avoid the types of tariffs that we believe are harmful and counterproductive. So we're continuing all our preparations and we will continue to talk to our member states, talk to our industry, and we remain ready to engage in a meaningful way with the US.
Despite the tariff-for-tariff war between major economies, there are now hopes that the parties involved will sit down for talks in a bid to ease the global trade tensions. Lee Seung-ja, Arirang News.
And the tariff news throughout the week had markets both at home and abroad on a roller coaster ride. On Thursday morning, when the 90-day tariff delay was announced, a buy-side sidecar was triggered for the first time in over 8 months, as the Kospi 200 futures jumped more than 5% from the previous session. Just days after a sell-side sidecar was activated on Monday, also for the first time in 8 months. The market rebound extended through the day, with the Kospi and the Kosdaq indexes both closing at around 6% up. Wall Street rebounded sharply following the news of Trump's 90-day tariff pause. The Dow Jones Industrial Average on Wednesday rose 7.87%, or over 2,962 points, to close at 40,608.45. The tech-heavy Nasdaq soared over 12%, up over 1,857 points from the previous trading session to close at 17,124.97. South Korea this week forged a formal diplomatic relations with Syria, the last remaining UN member state that did not have formal ties with Seoul. Our Bae-eun-ji has a story.
Syria has now become the 194th country in the world to form diplomatic relations with South Korea, marking a milestone for the country as it now has formal ties with all UN member states except North Korea. Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol visited Syria's capital city Damascus this week and signed a joint statement on Thursday local time with his counterpart Assad al-Shaibani.
By establishing diplomatic relations with Syria, the last remaining country with which we had no diplomatic ties, South Korea has now reached a historic milestone of establishing diplomatic relations with all 191 UN member states.
The two sides held a meeting where Cho said South Korea is willing to contribute to reconstruction efforts in Syria and discussed the possibility of Korean companies participating in rebuilding the country. He also promised Seoul will provide humanitarian assistance, including medicine, medical equipment, and rice. During his visit, Cho also met the country's interim president, Ahmed al-Shara, and said taking a firm stance against extremism and eliminating chemical weapons will help create an environment conducive to the country's development. South Korea started to work on forging diplomatic ties with Syria after more than 13 years of war recently put an end to the brutal Assad dictatorship, which had maintained a close relationship with North Korea for decades. The Assad family regime, which ruled the country for more than 50 years, collapsed in December during a major offensive by opposition forces. Syria has had diplomatic ties with North Korea since 1966, but the fall of the dictatorship brought about a significant shift in its relations with Pyongyang. Now that South Korea has forged ties with nations that have been close allies of the North, including Cuba last year, this latest diplomatic development is expected to further isolate Pyongyang on the global stage. Bae-eun-ji, Arirang News.
The Korean labor market is holding steady, with employment expanding in March, growing by almost 200,000 from a year ago. But that expansion remains uneven. Moon Ji-young explains.
South Korea's job market saw robust growth in March, but challenges persist, particularly in the construction and manufacturing sectors, along with youth employment. According to Statistics Korea's employment report released on Wednesday, the number of employed people aged 15 or older reached almost 28.6 million in March, marking a year-on-year increase of 193,000. This gain marks the third consecutive month of growth. By industry, the health and social welfare sector led the job gains, followed by public administration, defense, and social security, as well as the finance field. However, construction saw the largest year-on-year drop in jobs since data collection began in 2013, marking a continuous decline for 11 consecutive months. The manufacturing sector also recorded its most significant decline since November 2020, reflecting a ninth straight month of falls in employment. Some experts forecast that manufacturing, the backbone of the domestic economy, could see a further decline in jobs this year as export growth slows due to a potential trade war triggered by U.S. tariffs.
Due to the shock from tariffs, our product exports may decline, leading to a faster reduction in job opportunities. Since most of what we sell consists of manufactured goods, this could result in a reduction of decent jobs in the sector.
By age group, employment for those aged 60 years and older primarily led the job growth, adding 365,000 year-on-year. In contrast, the number of employed individuals aged 15 to 29 dropped by 206,000. The employment rate for young adults stood at 44.5%, marking the lowest monthly record for any March since 2021. With this latest data, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok expressed concerns regarding sluggish job growth, particularly in export-driven industries such as manufacturing, during an economic officials meeting on Wednesday. To address the volatility in the trade market, the government has committed to a supplementary budget of 10 trillion won, or roughly $6.7 billion. 문지영, Arirang News.
Spring has sprung here in the country with cherry blossoms in full bloom. One cherry blossom spot to enjoy is Yeouido in Central Seoul. Our Choi So-hyung takes us there.
It's cherry blossom season now in South Korea. Many people have come to Yeouido in Seoul to see the beautiful cherry blossoms fully blooming in the warm spring weather. Visitors enjoy a nice spring walk along the 1.7 kilometers long Yunjungno Road right by the National Assembly building.
This is one of the most famous hotspots to sightsee and enjoy the cherry blossoms in the capital city, Seoul.
This year's Cherry Blossom Festival in Yeouido started on Tuesday. Over 1,800 cherry blossom trees are planted here, circling around the National Assembly building and right next to the Hangang River. With rain in the forecast for the weekend, many people came to hang out and enjoy the flowers, even though it's a weekday.
We came here as a vacation, but we were not planning to see this beautiful blossoms that are going on right now with the beauty of spring. And so we are very grateful to be here and see the beauty of this beautiful park. It's just exploding with color, and the blossoms are absolutely stunning.
My baby just turned 1, so this is the first time seeing flowers like this. It was really fun and joyful. My baby really loved it too.
Actually, this is my first time coming to the Yeouido Cherry Blossom Festival. It's also the first time for my baby, so I'm really happy to be here. The weather is nice too, so we're enjoying the flowers a lot.
Facilities such as shelters for light picnics, photo zones and temporary health centers have been set up for visitors. It also has a special barrier-free tour program for people who are visually impaired. They can walk around Yeouido Park with a guide, touch the flowers to feel them, and enjoy the sound of the street performances. For those who want to know the best spots to enjoy this stunning view, use Exit 1 of National Assembly subway station on subway line number 9 or Exit 2 of Yeouido Station on line number 5. The festival was supposed to start on April 4th last Friday, but it was delayed as this fell on verdict day for former President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment trial. Because of that, the festival will continue until Saturday, April 12th. To run the festival, Yeongdeung-pogu office will close some parts of the road behind the National Assembly and traffic restrictions will stay in place until Sunday, April 13th. Choi So-hyung, Arirang News.
That is all we have for this weekend. Thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your weekend wherever you are.